Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of the 1904 Club podcast. No Fletch this morning because he's in a cupboard somewhere. Prutz has gone to Cheltenham, so look out on the telly later for some drunken antics from a Yorkshire crew at Cheltenham Festival. But we are joined by Kathyrn and George Elek from Not the Top 20 podcast, who I guess unfortunately for him was at the MKM Stadium last night working for BBC Radio Oxford and had the displeasure as an Oxford fan of watching Hull City roar back to win 2-1. Morning, Kathyrn. We'll start with you. Are you all right?
I'm not bad, Baz. I was already mentioned to you that I look like I'm sort of sat in a forest or a jungle somewhere. I am in an office. I'm not just. I know. Yeah, I wish I was, but sadly, I'm just sat outside the office in the cafe that has got some leaves for some apparent reason.
Everybody likes leaves. And George, so you were at the MKM last night. Obviously, a long journey back in the rain, like the rest of us. How are you?
Tired, frustrated, annoyed. It was to be ahead in that position. And realistically, I think going into that game, it was pretty obvious that whoever won the game was probably going to put themselves in a position that was relatively strong in this relegation battle, and whoever lost was going to be dragged into it. And the fact that Stoke and Argyle went and won their games only meant it was an even more important game than we realised before kickoff. So, it was. I didn't think it was a terrible performance from us. I thought it was probably a case of two pretty bad teams on the night, and it was a pretty tight game with few chances. But you guys took yours, and you took a couple for you, for us it was a night of frustration.
Kathyrn, it was. We talked about it on the show on Monday, didn't we? Saying how it was. In many ways, it felt must win, and that was before Derby and Luton both won on Tuesday night. And given those results, and that City won defeat in 5 before last night, but that gap was cut to 2 points. Had they have lost last night, the knives would have been out, and the feeling would have been massively negative, wouldn't it? But I guess it was after 66 minutes as well when Michael Elek scored a quite brilliant volley. But the fact they came back and they found a way to win, it doesn't really matter at this stage of the season. In many ways, how aesthetically pleasing performances are, it is about getting points, and that's exactly what they've done.
Yeah, and it's I don't know when the last time was when we came from behind to win, but it feels like it was a really long time ago. And I remember the Cardiff game a couple of weeks ago when we went 1-0 down. We just didn't look like coming back into the game, and I feared kind of a repeat of that last night when we went a goal down. I just thought I don't see a way back into this game because they weren't really creating fantastic chances. Joe Gelhardt looked like the best kind of outlet, and obviously it did end up being him that got us back into the game. But I think Casey Palmer coming off the bench made a real difference. Obviously, he was involved in the equalising goal, and it just seemed to give us a little bit of a lift. But I did kind of fear the worst, as you say, as we went a goal down. But the fact that they've come back and won, and when they've not done that before, I think psychologically that's a huge thing for them. And it did feel like a massive 3 points. I think I'd said to you on Monday, it felt like a must win, but I was kind of in the camp of must not lose. After those results, seeing Derby win, seeing Luton win, looking at half-time, seeing Plymouth winning, seeing Stoke winning, suddenly it felt like, actually, no, this is must win. I think, looking at the table now, we were saying Portsmouth were sort of dead safe on Monday, and now we're only 2 points behind them. So it's funny how much, things can change in a couple of games.
On that subject, George, Kathyrn's right, isn't she? Because I watched the Norwich game, your boys, last Friday night, and the talk after the game with Chris Sutton and Jamie Mackey in the Sky Sports studio, talking to Gary, was very much, well, you've got an 8-point gap now. Oxford, they're pretty much safe. Fast forward a week, that's been halved, hasn't it? And the feeling, I guess, around your place will be very different. Having been, that initial burst under Gary, now it's no wins in 9, is it? So that's a real concern, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a massive concern, and that's the predicament that we're in now, and that's the issue. Is I've been one of those kind of banging the drum, saying it might feel like the form is bad, but so long as we've got this big gap to those in the relegation zone, we're probably going to be okay. But naturally, the bottom end of the table, if you can pick up back-to-back wins like Derby have managed, if you can win 2 games in 3 like Luton have managed, you bridge that gap very quickly because other teams aren't really picking up points, and this week couldn't have gone worse for us, with basically every team around us winning or beneath us winning, and us throwing away a winning position. So Yeah, it's the way that things work, it kind of frustrates me often. Our fans are basically now decided that we're going to lose every game from now to the end of the season, and that just isn't really the way that football works. And I can guarantee you that the Argyle fans heading to Fratton Park last night would have told you there was absolutely zero chance of them getting a win there. Similarly with Luton going to Cardiff, we've got a game against Watford on Saturday that I think is very winnable. But there was a moment for Oxford a couple of weeks ago where we were 1-0 up against Bristol City at home, 10 against 11. And if we won that game, I think we'd have got up to 40 points. And then a few weeks later, we're still on 39. So difficult now. I think for Hull, it's just a seismic result last night, isn't it? You lose that game, and as you say, it becomes very, very nervy and difficult. The good feeling of winning your third home game this season at home to Argyle is kind of extinguished very quickly. But instead, it's back-to-back home wins. It's coming from behind. And you've gone past your relegation rival.
Absolutely. That, and what you said about the fans is really interesting, isn't it? Because I'm surrounded, unfortunately, by quite a lot of Derby fans, and they basically written the season off. Eustace had come in, not won the game. They were going down. Stephen Pearce, who's the chief executive, get him out. It's a shambles. Suddenly, in the space of 4 days, they've beaten two teams in and around the playoffs in Blackburn and Coventry. They're looking more likely. Cardiff, a quick scan of, after they beat Hull City a couple of weeks ago, Hull City fans were, that's it, we're going down. Cardiff was staying up. Now, after Cardiff lost to Luton, Vincent Tan this, Omar Rees has got to go. We're going to be in League One. And like you say, the Oxford fans, it's so, the reaction is so reactionary, isn't it, to a result. And it would have been the same for Hull City last night had we have lost the game last night. Suddenly you're 2 points above the bottom three. You've not been able to win a fourth home game and back it up. And also, like they did with Stoke a few weeks ago and Cardiff, they'd have given a leg up to a rival. But that's how fluid this system is, isn't it? How quickly it can change.
Yeah, and also people just focus on their own team's performances. That there's just, like, if we're playing badly, then that's it. It's not good enough. But you forget there are other teams around you playing badly as well. It's so cyclical. There was in League One in about October or November, it looked like the 4 relegated sides from League One was basically already done. So far detached were they from the rest of the pack. And then suddenly, about 6 weeks ago, they were winning games. The teams above them, the likes of Northampton, Bristol Rovers, Peterborough, were all losing, and looked open again. But now you look at the league table, and those 4 teams who looked relegated back in earlier in the year are now losing again, and it looks like they're going to go down. Everything changes so quickly that it, like Jerome, who's the head of sport at BBC Oxford, texted me after the game last night and said, we're 9 unbeaten. There are 9 games left to go. Are we really going to go 18 games without a win? Probably not, because teams generally don't do that, and managers like Gary Rowett generally don't go through those periods. So I'm trying to keep a level head. It's just annoying to have been in that position last night, 1-0 up, having scored a brilliant goal, and then to come so close. I mean, that in a game of very little quality, that Shemi Plaheta cushioned volley from 25, 30 yards to hit the crossbar. Yeah. Like, if that goes in, I think it's one of the best goals I've ever seen live, and instead it comes off the crossbar, and we don't really fashion another attack all game.
Absolutely. Kathyrn, from City's point of view, that's not that it really matters in the grander context of things, but little crumbs of comfort when you've seen so few home wins over, pretty much since the club got promoted back to the Championship. That's the first time they've won 2 in a row at home since November 2023. So it's another monkey off the back for the team, isn't it? And for Ruben as well. He's getting them moving, and that's now 1 defeat in 6. He's won 7 of his games. He's lost 7, and they didn't play particularly well last night, but they've ground it out, and that's. If you are going to stay in the division, you've got to have that ability. And coupled with what we saw at Ashton Gate on Saturday, having been down to 10 men for including added time, 87 minutes, there's clearly an element of character and resilience in that dressing room, isn't it? Even and having gone 1-0 down last night, and the crowd started to turn before realising that actually the players need us here. They have got resilience, which is so important.
They have, yeah. And there was a moment on commentary when Burnsy said about the back-to-back home wins, and he said it's been 15 months, and I genuinely thought he was going to say 15 years at one point, because that's kind of how it felt. It's been so long since they'd won back-to-back games at home. But I think there was a real kind of grit and determination, and it was a scrappy performance. That it was a really poor game, to be honest, and it wasn't a great watch. But it was just one of those where for either team they just hadn't had to drag themselves through it, and thankfully for City they managed to do it. And I do think the substitutes made a difference as well. People like Mason Burstow, who has been kind of on the bench for quite a while now and not really been getting as many chances as he did when Ruben Selles first came in, since the January signings have come in. I thought he came on and looked lively and just played his part. You want the players to come on from the bench and just play their part. I thought Casey Palmer did that. I thought Burstow did that. I thought Regan Slater did that. And I think, when you're looking through that squad, even with all the players that we've got missing, there is character in there and there is determination and there is enough in there to kind of, I think, scrap and kind of drag us out of it. And I think we actually saw that last night. I think there's been times where we've not seen it. Maybe at Cardiff was a fine example, but I think last night, we saw it, and I think you could hear the crowd through the commentary. You could really hear them getting behind the players. You could hear the groans as well when we were 1-0 down, but you could hear them. As soon as it went 1-1, it felt like we had the momentum, and I kind of felt like they were going to go on and win the game. And a huge result.
It was almost like there was a collective. Once Oxford scored, they sort of had the groans for a couple of minutes, and it was almost like everybody on the terraces looked at each other and went, "Hang on a minute. We need to get behind them here." So they collectively tried to get behind them. George, from your point of view, when Gary came in to speak to us after the game, I sort of asked him, for his thoughts on the game, and he offered up very honestly that he was really angry with the team, and he said it's probably the first time since I've been here that I'm angry with the team and what have you. Can you understand, particularly from the manner of the goals, and he felt the overall performance? Can you understand his frustration in the game of that size?
Yeah, I could definitely understand his frustration. I think the two things that seemed to frustrate him were the manner of the goals that we conceded, like how we allowed Casey Palmer to kind of walk through our midfield and be on the ball. He's pretty not a player you want to be giving time and space on the ball 25 yards from goal. And it was a nice disguised ball through, but it was too easy. And then the second one, it's one of those classic ones, the second one, where if you're a Hull fan, you're saying, "Oh, look at that Puerta kind of shimmy to get past the man." If you're an Oxford fan, you're saying, "What is Alex Matos doing? Like, how does he get pulled away so easily and make it so easy for Puerta to go past him?" And obviously, it was a very clever finish to kind of rifle it low and hard at Cummings' legs and divert it into the back of the net. But I think the manner of the goals frustrated him, and then I think the lack of attacking threat, having gone behind, where we may have had some territory, we may have hit the bar from 30 yards, but Panda didn't really have a save to make, and I think he felt like we should have been much more direct at getting balls into the box where possible rather than kind of retaining the ball. So I can understand that. I mean, I'm, as a fan, pretty frustrated that we were so late to make changes. It felt like the changes that we made once we went 2-1 down were probably the changes we should have made at 1-1. Matt Phillips is someone who's, to my mind, his days as a championship footballer probably should have come an end last summer. He doesn't have the kind of pace and athleticism that he once had to make him effective down that left-hand side. And it felt like our left wing was basically a blind alley for most of the game. And as soon as Xiao Pedro came on the right-hand side and we stretched you and could get him behind, the game changed a fair bit in terms of what we were able to do in open play. So, but it was kind of good to hear Gary get frustrated. He's normally a very calm guy, and it was, he kind of laid down the law to the players a bit, and it'll be interesting to see what their reaction is like on Saturday against Watford.
What difference, George, did Elliot Moore going off have? Obviously, he went off just at 0-0 just before. Obviously, you scored the first goal. It felt like he was a big figure in that game in the centre of defence up to that point.
Yeah, I mean, he's a massive player for us. He's club captain. He's kind of been in and out of the side a little bit ever since Michael Helek came in January. But him coming off, I think it's never ideal for a centre back to go off anyway. Midway through a second half where it's not planned. Ben Nelson, who was the player that came on, those were his first minutes in a long time. I thought he played very well. What's quite interesting is that Ben Nelson came into our side early in the season, having not played when we were on a winning run. He came in, looked very good individually, but we started losing games. And that was against Hull in the reverse. And again, he came on yesterday, and you have to think that maybe just disrupting our defensive duo may have played some part, especially in the first goal, where it was just so easy for Hull to both run and then play through the lines right through the middle of the park.
And no Brannigan and Goodrum. Brannigan looks like a real talent. What again? how big a blow are not having those two in the side?
Yeah, not having Brannigan is a huge miss. I mean, he's probably our most important player in terms of what he does for us, both in terms of progressive passing, but also ball retention. I kind of feel like had he been playing, it probably would have been a different story, purely in terms of what we could do from an attacking perspective and open play. With Tyler, I mean, he's an incredibly talented guy. His form has dipped a little bit in the second half of the season. He had his first kid kind of at the turn of the year, which may play a part in that. As those of us with young children may know, you're not at your peak to go and perform with young kids. But he's someone who's kept fresh for the Norwich game to play in midweek. So for him to fall ill and to kind of lack his energy and quality certainly didn't help us either. But everyone has injuries, don't they? So you can't complain too much.
As we know full well, Kathyrn. We touched on defenders there with Oxford, Kathyrn. How impressed were you with Charlie Hughes, and also just his impact since coming back into the side? I know, obviously, the marking for the Oxford goal was a bit non-existent generally from as a collective, but that goal aside, Hughes was very good last night, wasn't he? And his impact since he's come into the team has been stark.
I think he just gets us playing as well. I think his diagonal passes, he gives us another outlet. He's, bringing the ball out of defence. He's very, very good on the ball. I think he's probably our best passer of the ball of any of the defenders. And yeah, other than the goal, it was really difficult to see who was at fault for the goal. It was like someone kind of lost their marker, and then I didn't know if it was Hughes' player or if he'd got shoved onto Hughes. It was all very, as you say, the marking seemed to be a bit non-existent. But other than that kind of poor moment, which thankfully didn't cost us, like we were saying the other day, I think he's made a huge difference kind of coming back into the team, and it just feels like a more settled back four now with Hughes and Jones, Coyle and McLaughlin. I think that's pretty settled, and to be fair, John Egan when he came on, I thought helped shore things up as well. So you've got the options to potentially add an extra defender on if we're trying to see out a game, but I think that back four since Hughes has come back in has definitely looked more comfortable than it did earlier in the season.
George, obviously one of the big talking points was the red card or the second yellow card for Puerta at the end. What was your kind of take on it? Obviously, watching on from the gantry from the press box.
Yeah, live, I thought he was probably going to give a penalty. Watching it back, it seems like probably the right decision. It looks like it's a kind of one of those where it's a bit of a vault. I think often players can get penalised for taking evasive action, which is wrong. But in this case, it looked to me like it was simulation or an attempt to deceive the referee. I mean, I wouldn't have had any complaints had he not been sent off. Probably, I don't think it was a penalty. But I always think when, as the attacking player, when you effectively jump rather than fall, you're basically giving the referee a decision to make. Either you've got to give a penalty or you've got to give a dive. You can't just wave play on and say carry on. And in this instance, the referee decided it was. It didn't make any bearing on the game. Obviously, it's frustrating for you guys to lose him for a game because I can't imagine it'll get overturned. And it can't anyway, can it? Because it was a second yellow.
No.
What did you guys think?
Go on, Kathyrn.
I thought
penalty.
I wouldn't have been massively bothered if he did, not giving the penalty, because I think sometimes you can say there's not enough contact for it to be a penalty, but then it's also not a dive. When we watch the replay, you can see I can't remember who the defender was. He had hold of his shirt. He's pulling his shirt back, and it gives him a shove. And there also looked to be a little bit of contact on the legs. If it had just been the leg contact, there's nowhere near enough contact for me. But the fact that he's got a hold of his shirt and then he does give him a shove as well, don't give a penalty, fine. But to actually book him in the 97th minute and to send him off and he now misses a game, I just think
it looked to me like
decision.
It looked to me like he didn't. I don't think he realised he'd booked him when he first booked him. It
took him a while
it took him a while to then go to his pocket to get the red out. I wonder if it was only once he'd shown the yellow, he was like, you're already in the book. But then at the same time, that it shouldn't really impact his decision making. A second yellow shouldn't be worth more than a first yellow, should it? So, but no, I mean, look, I think again, if I was a Hull fan, I'd probably be sitting here saying it was a terrible decision. It should have been a penalty. So.
It was Ben Nelson, but I guess from City's point of view, the frustration comes on the back of the Xiao Pedro red card on at Bristol City, which they appealed. and the appeal failed. So obviously he's banned for 3 games in a team that are struggling for goals, losing your leading scorer, albeit only with 6. I think the frustration, although that, just quickly on that, George, you would have seen that back. Any complaints over Pedro's red card at Ashton Gate?
I can't believe you guys appealed it. I mean, not even if you don't agree with the decision, like there's just never in a million years is that going to get overturned. Like these days you basically only get red cards overturned if it's mistaken identity or just an absolute clanger. Like I mean, I don't really know what Pedro was doing, but by making that kind of challenge anyway in that area of the pitch, even if it wasn't necessarily a red, you're just going in with that much kind of force. You're just giving the referee a decision to make, really. Yeah. I mean, again, if it's a yellow, that there are no complaints, I don't think. But there's never in a million years is that going to get overturned.
I think they just, from the club's point of view, I think they thought, look, we'll cite 1 or 2 other similar incidents maybe that haven't been issued with red cards. He is also a very important player.
Yeah. I get it.
Let's chance our arm. You're right. It was never going to be overturned in a million years because of the nature of the challenge, the fact he was out of control. It was reckless, whether we like it or not. It was reckless. He did need to make it, and as we've all made the point on Monday, once he does that, he gives the referee a decision to make either way. He didn't need to do it. Perhaps it's the adrenaline of having scored seconds earlier, etc. But look, from the club's point of view, I think they probably just thought it's worth chancing our arm, see what happens. We expect it to get upheld, or dismissed as the case was, but it was worth a go. Kathyrn, on Puerta, it's a real shame, isn't it, for him, because it's taken him a while to find his groove since coming in from Bayer Leverkusen, and he's come into the team. He's had that. He's developed a little bit of a partnership with Steven Alzate, the 2 Colombians. He's getting some consistency. You can see on the ball his ability, his vision. He's obviously created a couple of goals in recent weeks. Some of his passing, like the goal, the Kamara goal against Plymouth, his through ball for Pedro was brilliant. So while it's only 1 game that he comes out for, it's a real blow for him, isn't it? Because that now stops his kind of momentum and his consistency. And it also gives an opportunity to somebody else now to claim that place for the Luton game after the international break.
And he had his goal taken off him. It went down as an own goal as well, bless him. And I think it's where you could see his frustration when he got sent off. That was probably because he's in such a good run of form, and now he's going to have to sit out a game. And I think he's been one of the best players over the last couple of weeks. So it's a real blow to lose him for West Brom. The only thing I would say is that it's better to probably lose him for that game than Luton, because you could maybe bring in a Regan Slater where you're probably going to have less of the ball against West Brom, and maybe somebody that's going to kind of get up and down the pitch. Potentially maybe that change would have happened anyway. But I actually didn't think Steven Alzate had his best game last night compared to kind of the high standards we've seen from him. So I actually thought Puerta kind of playing as well as he did was really, really kind of key. It's just like you say, I think it's just frustrating to now lose him for a match. And the Sky co-commentator was from Scotland, and he said in Scotland you can appeal yellow cards for simulation. And then he went on to say, so hopefully the Hull can do that. And I said, well, unless we're going to move countries, we're not going to be able to do that. But in Scotland, you can appeal the yellow cards for simulation. So maybe they should bring that as a rule in over here.
It is. George, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, because I've often wondered that in football generally, not just because of last night, but just generally how, in this day and age, how when players get a second yellow card, and if it is a poor decision in the eyes of the football club, how that isn't, you can't appeal that. Is that something that you think they should look at, or do you think it's fine as it is?
I think it's fine as it is. I mean, I think surely what's going on in the Premier League and top tier football around the world shows us that as little post-event intervention into subjective decisions is as possible is the best thing. And with red cards, normally there's probably a line that is a little less blurry than a yellow card. Like with simulation, it's always going to be subjective. You're always going to have a player telling you that they felt something, or they were caught, or whatever else. And no matter how many replays you watch, you're always going to have to make a judgment call as to what the intention of a player was rather than what the actual action was. And I think it would just cause way too much drama. I think having, stopping, as we said last week, or earlier this week, Hull appealed a red card that I think would have been a million to one to get overturned. And if we start opening up appeals for yellow cards, I think you're just going to create a scenario where clubs are going to be demanding things to be overturned consistently. So, I think personally I'd get rid of appeals totally and just say, the referee might have made a mistake, but it's human error and that's part of football.
That's a big one. Kathyrn, what do you think about that?
I kind of see the point. I can see the point. I can see the argument. I think it's just one of those ones when it's so obviously wrong. I can remember Umaneas getting sent off against Watford when we were in. We actually did get relegated that season, so anyway. But when we were going down from the Premier League, we were playing against Watford, and he got a red card for essentially it was a really one of those. It did get overturned, and I remember there's actually. If you Google Umaneas red card against Watford, he's got his face. It's like the scream is like he can't believe he's been sent off. I think essentially just put his foot down on the floor, and I think the ref thought he'd stamped on him. And sometimes things like that can happen.
Yeah, I'd agree. And mistaken identity as well is obvious one where that. If you get sent off just because you look like someone else doesn't mean you obviously then you shouldn't get a 3-match ban.
Kathyrn. In terms of obviously no Puerta at the Hawthorns, who is it Slater that comes in for him straight replacement? Do you think?
I think so. I mean, there'd be an argument for Casey Palmer, but obviously it would feel more like an attacking kind of change, and I think he'd probably be obviously still coming back to fitness. I imagine he might still be a player that comes off the bench to try and make an impact in the second half. He'd probably be someone that would come in for a Matt Crooks rather than a Puerta. And I think Slater's work rate and tenacity is something we might need in a game like West Brom, where we're probably not expecting to have much of the ball. Last night we were probably, we would expect him to have more possession and somebody you want like a Puerta on the ball because he can kind of unlock in a defence. Whereas away from home against West Brom, where we're probably going to be doing more defending, I think actually Slater's ability to get up and down the pitch, and we know he scores more away from home, and I know he's had problems scoring this season, so maybe at West Brom he might finally get a goal.
George, what have you made of West Brom this season? Obviously Corberán going, Tony Mowbray coming in, still firmly entrenched in the top 6 picture.
Yeah, I went up to the Hawthorns a couple of weeks ago and they completely played. I mean, they just bossed the game. We didn't get anywhere near them. We barely fashioned an attack. As you saw yesterday, quite a big part of our attacking play at the moment is Will Vaulks absolutely launching the ball into the box whenever he gets opportunity from throw-ins, and we didn't even get a throw-in until about the 89th minute to do that. I was pretty concerned. I mean, I'm a huge Tony Mowbray fan and I'm a huge Carlos Corberán fan, but I can't really think of two managers with more different playing styles and philosophies and man management styles, crucially, where Corberán is very, very distant. I've heard he only refers to all his players by their surname, whereas Tony Mowbray is someone who, I think actually physically will give his players a cuddle and will kind of nurture them and mentor them. And I was pretty worried about how that mid-season to go from having someone who's so standoffish and so meticulous to having a guy who effectively wants to be your favourite uncle, and how that would work, with playing style shifting as well. But it seems to have worked very well so far. If anything, it seems to have kind of rerouted them back on their path towards the playoffs. So been pretty impressed. Obviously, the addition of Adam Armstrong has given them a cutting edge up front that they needed after the injury to Josh Madger, who they were so reliant on goals for previously. Tom Fellows on the right-hand side is a player who is, his form has dipped a little bit, as you'd expect with a young player later on in the season, but he's someone who, is probably destined for the Premier League relatively soon. They look to me to be in a pretty good position to finish in the top 6 again this season. And unlike last season where they were outclassed in the playoffs, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they were able to maybe cause some teams some issues, as seen by the fact that they've gone away to Leeds and Burnley, who could well finish in the top 2 in their last 2 away games and come away with a point in each of those.
Yeah, Kathyrn, just quickly on the subject of Saturday, final game before the international break. When you look at the response since the Cardiff defeat a couple of weeks ago, they've taken 7 points from 9. Obviously, the 2 games against Plymouth and Oxford, plus the point at Ashton Gate, which, as we said before, probably they would have taken a point before the game. before going 1-0 up and then losing Xiao. So that's been a really good response. How do you see the West Brom game?
I don't want to say free hit, because when you're in a relegation battle, I'm not sure that kind of exists, but it does kind of feel like anything we can get from that would be a bonus. I think when I was kind of saying to you on Monday, the run of those 4 games, Plymouth at home, Bristol away, Oxford at home, it was a case of win the 2 home games and get a point away from home, and they've managed to do that. If they were to lose against West Brom, I don't think it would be the end of the world, but I think a point would be huge. And we obviously know kind of that City have had better fortunes on the road this season. They've gone away and beaten Sunderland and given them their first defeat at home all season. They've beaten Sheffield United away from home, so there's nothing to kind of say that they can't go there and win. I do think, the injuries and now the 2 suspensions is going to make it pretty difficult, but I think we've got every chance of getting going there and picking up a draw or something like that. So it'd be nice to keep the unbeaten run going as well.
Yeah. Just quickly, 2 bits of housekeeping. There'll be no Cody Drame at the Hawthorns. He's got a knee injury that he picked up in training, so he's out for a couple of weeks, but he should be back for the Luton game. Ruben Selles is back on the bench, having served a touchline ban last night. And Charlie Hughes has got to be careful because he picked up his 8th booking of the season last night. And the cut-off point for 10 bookings, the 39th game, is at the end of the Luton game. So he needs to try and avoid a booking at the Hawthorns. Just finally, George, before we all head off, obviously you did the podcast a few weeks ago on Not the Top 20 with Ruben. Shortly after he was appointed, you spoke to him. I just wanted to kind of get you to kind of talk about what you think of that appointment. I know he was appointed back in December, but I think he's now the 15th longest serving manager in the Championship, having only been appointed in December. But obviously you've spoken to him. You clearly a fan of his work in the job he did at Reading. A couple of months on from that interview you did with him, how have you assessed his job, the job he's done at City, and his progress as a manager in the Championship?
I think he's done a relatively good job. I mean, I think in the position that he came into at Hull, it's always difficult for managers because they come into a really ambitious club and the fan base hope and think that as soon as the last manager leaves, the new one comes in, then those ambitions will be matched with the results. But realistically, you're coming into a side who are underperforming. There was no evidence to suggest that, unlike Coventry, for example, like all of Coventry's underlying numbers under Mark Robins suggested that they were nowhere near as bad as their results were. And Frank Lampard, it feels to me like has walked in through the door. It's like they say on a slot machine in Vegas, if you sit and watch someone lose for a while, if you jump on when they walk away, then you're the one that cashes in. And I think that's been the case with Coventry. Whereas at Hull, there was, the results weren't good, and Sellers has come in. And with a really young attacking unit, which isn't necessarily what you want and need when you're in a relegation scrap in the Championship with Kamara and with Gelhardt and with Carl Joseph, I think he's made you a team who are harder to beat, who, especially away from home, really stay in games against top sides. And having interviewed him, like the way he talks about the game, it makes you feel like an absolute novice. Like I said, I've never felt more confident that I would be a terrible football manager as when I was speaking to Ruben Selles, because his vision and the way he talks about the sport is just levels beyond what I could even imagine. Like I joked with him, it was that ball that the Burstow played through to Kamara against Leeds, and I made a joke about how Sellers' arm went out, and I said you saw the ball early, and he. I joked about it, and he was like, no, it's something we work on training. Like it's, he'd use these kind of terminologies about how it's almost like a set play, what they were doing there in open play. He's someone who managed a really difficult situation at Reading with incredible calmness, like to keep the fans on side when his employer was so incredibly unpopular, and he became almost like a spokesperson to and for the fan base, and carried himself with immense credit, and kind of stayed in that job probably longer than he really had to, given the circumstances off the pitch. I think you've got a gem. I'd be absolutely amazed if the Ruben Selles and Hull story ends badly. I think it's just a case you've got to get through the season. You've got to make sure you get promoted. Then you start building a team in his image. And the most impressive thing about him is he seems to just have an absolute Midas touch with these young players. Like he was forced at Reading to play so many academy graduates. who, without the difficult circumstances at Reading, just wouldn't have been near the first team, and they've all stepped up into decent League One players who are now on the brink of the playoffs. You look at the career, certainly of Burstow and Joe Gelhardt, that were really fizzling out, having had serious promise as young players at Wigan and at Charlton. And they look, if you show Sunderland fans what Joe Gelhardt did last night, what Mason Burstow did with that ridiculous run down the left-hand side, they'd tell you they were different players. He seems to be so adept at bringing the best out of these young kids and breathing a bit of freedom and life into them. And yeah, if I was a Hull fan, even if you're not convinced at this stage, I'd be really excited about what's to come under him.
Is that the thing, George, just finally, that if City can survive, and it looks like on their trajectory that their ability to pick up wins, they might just be okay, that if they can have a much more stable summer compared with 12 months ago, that next season, with some decent recruitment in key areas, up front, particularly maybe at left back, one or two other areas, they could be a team that potentially could challenge next season. They've got a core squad. The likes of Miller and Bellumi are coming back. Matarzo hopefully won't be too far away with his ACL injury. One or two other players. Louis Barry might come back next year as well.
100%. I know there's, I think the perception from outside Hull and the reality are very different. I think a lot of fans of the EFL and the Championship think that Ashen is a kind of crazy owner, and like the reality is the amount of money that he's invested in the club already, and the ambition that he's got, I think suggests that the platform is there for Hull to be a side challenging the top end of the Championship. All it takes is someone to get them there, and the decision was made to part company with Rossignol. That's the one decision I would see from the owner that was very rash and wasn't necessarily kind of evidence or process based thinking. But I think now in Selles you've got another guy who's destined for the top, and you've got to hope that the heart of the team that he takes there. So I'd be pretty confident. It reminds me, Oxford a couple of seasons ago, we brought in Liam Manning when we were in a similar position to Hull at the bottom end of the League One, and fans weren't particularly enamoured by him. He kind of did a job to keep us up, and then in the summer, after a lot of work in order to build his side, we went from being the 20th best team in League One to being, when he left us, we were second, and that was just a couple of months. Things can change so quickly season to season, and we do our predictions and stuff over the summer. But if and when Hull stay up, they'll certainly be on my list of teams to watch over the summer from a recruitment standpoint, in a positive sense, rather than one that I'd be concerned about next season.
Kathyrn, before we go, survival prospects, feeling much more confident now?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was a big win last night, and I still think we can't kind of stop looking over our shoulders, because I think Portsmouth started to do that, and now it feels like they're not been quite dragged back in, but they're still kind of in and around it. You are just kind of one or two defeats away from being right back in danger. But I think psychologically, all of the fans probably feel a little bit more comfortable now, but still kind of work to do.
George, who are your three to go down?
Oh God, not Oxford. I'm still going to say that it's going to turn the other way. I think Argyle will go down. I think Luton will go down. And maybe John Eustace will get enough out of Derby, and we'll see Cardiff be the third team to get relegated. There's a massive. Oxford play Cardiff in a couple of weeks, and it feels like that's going to be incredibly important.
Yeah, absolutely. Derby at Plymouth on Saturday. George, really appreciate your time this morning. So thank you very much for popping by, and best of luck for the rest of the season. Let's hope Oxford and Gary can stay up. And Kathyrn, thanks so much from Centre Parks. It's lovely to see you there.
Thanks, Baz.
And we'll be back again soon after the trip to West Brom. If you're going to the Hawthorns, have a safe trip. And we'll be back again on Monday. Thanks, George.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Kathyrn.
Cheers, mate. See you.
See you later.